Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by again. Look, if you're like me, over the past couple days, you saw this outstanding video by Natalie Wynn over at ContraPoints. She does a fantastic job at outlining the crisis of masculinity and outlining the reality that because she's lived as both a man and a woman, she has a unique perspective into what it's like living as a man and being treated as a man, and what it's like living as a woman and being treated as a woman. And she tries to sort of overview this question of, how do men suffer under patriarchy? And all in all, the video does a fantastic job. I largely agree with most of the main points. And of course, as always, extremely comical, well-timed, beautifully edited and shot. Fantastic video. If you haven't seen ContraPoints, go watch ContraPoints. But I do have something of an issue with her discussion near the end of the video where she talked about the limitations of the socialist approach to male liberation. And she sort of notes it as, well, we're going to have the revolution, we're going to destroy capitalism, and in so doing, we're going to liberate men because men need to be liberated as working class people, and that will solve the issue. And she goes into the fact that she's skeptical whether or not the left as currently constituted can end capitalism, and she's skeptical of the fact that even if capitalism were to be dissolved, that we would still have gender norms that exist, and men would struggle to define themselves as to what is, an ideal, positive figure of masculinity. And I don't think she's wrong there, but I think more should have been said for how elements of socialist platforms can provide positive outlets for men and positive arenas for male companionship and friendship. And I think that's something important to note. One of the crises of masculinity in our times is, it relates to employment. It relates to, as she notes in this video, a lack of hope to long-term goals. She notes that as one of the areas of vulnerability that can lead young men to the far right, that can lead men to inceldom. And I think that what people like Bernie Sanders and what a lot of socialists have been talking about through things like the Green New Deal and through things like a job guarantee and through things like the rebuilding of working class dignity is providing some of that. Of course, that's not just for men. That helps women as well and non-binary people, building a better society where work has more meaning. But I do feel that because men, and this is related to toxic masculinity, I felt it myself, have this sense that they're not really men unless they're earning a good wage and providing for their family or have the potential to provide for a family, that they're not actually doing what's needed to be real men. And I think that if you build an infrastructure that guarantees these things as a human right to all people, men and women and those who are neither, you will offer at least a partial solution to one of the crises of at least young millennial masculinity, which is being combined with the millennial struggles of precarity and poverty and, being highly educated in some cases, yet not being able to find work that's fulfilling or remunerative to the skills and experiences that the person has, and on and on and on. I do think that's crucially important. And I think that we can solve some of those issues with things like a Green New Deal. That we don't have to just, have this vision that challenges traditional male work as obsolete, to put forth this narrative of male obsolescence, but rather say that for men and women and everybody else, there is a place for you in the future society. It's not a strict class reductionist analysis. It's an analysis that at least in part challenges male disposability because it challenges the disposability of everybody. I think another related point has to be the role of trade unionism. And of course, trade unionism was never good when it was a boys' club, and nor should it ever be a boys' club. But it's hard to deny that for a lot of working class men, the union was not just a tool to bargain for better wages and to protect yourself from, employer intransigence and to protect yourself from arbitrary firings and to protect yourself from injury and illness and all of those very important material things. The union played an immense social role. The union was a place of camaraderie, of brotherhood, of real friendship, of the sense that you were united by more than just your time at work, but your time beyond it, as a class, as brothers, as people fighting for a better world, for those unions that were more socially minded. And I think in some ways, with the decline of the labor movement, especially in the private sector, where, this industrial unionism was rooted in a sort of masculine expression of those workplaces, we've lost some of that. And I don't know if the solution is to return to bro unionism, but I do hope that a recommitment to the ideals of trade unionism, the reproliferation of trade unionism through proposals like those from Bernie Sanders, will help build these ties for men. The decline of unions has not only been a boon to the capitalist class and a bust to the working masses. We've seen the charts, as unions collapse, corporations and the rich profit. We've seen the analysis that show that the top 1 or 5 or 10% have benefited from this, this transfer of wealth, whereas the classes that would typically be protected by unions, either directly or indirectly because unions raise, sectoral standards, are suffering right now. We know all that. But I believe that it would also build those community ties, those ties in the workplace, building a bond of brotherhood between those workers. And again, it's not just about brotherhood and the exclusion of sisters and other people, but it is to say that I believe that unions, that the left offers these historical, examples of arenas where men could be men in a positive fashion with one another. And I think that we can get some of that back. Now, of course, I'm ultimately a believer that capitalism must fall if we want to have a just society. But I do know that we can do things in the meantime that can still make things better. And I do feel that if we fight for better working standards, and if we try to rebuild the important role of trade unionism inside and outside the workplace, then we can help create new spaces, really old spaces, but reinvigorate them for men today. And this is not a criticism of Natalie Wynn's video. I just sort of felt that perhaps some of this could have been interrogated a little bit more. I think she sort of said, well, do vote for Bernie Sanders, do vote for Elizabeth Warren. So she does note that there are ways to envision electoral politics as, something worthwhile, even if only as harm reduction, even if only as, trying to do a little bit of what you can to stop the worst from happening. But more should have been said about how elements of socialism, just like elements of feminism, are going to be essential building blocks into finding out what the ideal masculinity is. And Natalie Wynn put it perfectly. She says this is something men have to figure out. And I think specifically, given that we're dealing with crises of young white male masculinity, it's going to fall to people like myself and like many other YouTubers. There's a lot of us white guys around. I don't have that answer. I don't have it. And so while I don't have that answer, I'm happy to be a part of the discussions. But I do feel that, it's not either or. It's not because the revolution isn't likely to happen. Socialism doesn't offer at least part of the answer towards getting us to a good masculinity. I think it does, and I think we really do have to look historically and contemporarily about how in the future we can build a masculinity rooted not in, as Natalie Wynn noted in the video, an atomized, individualized, competitive notion with one another, but built on solidarity and comradeship and brotherhood. And I think that's a much better way to get to the idea of masculinity that will hurt less men and will also hurt less women. So I want to thank Natalie Wynn for her fantastic video. Again, I don't want this to be construed as a criticism of her video or the broad points therein. I was just trying to add my perspective of how socialism, at least on the question of how do we provide meaning for working people, men included, and how do we build the bonds of solidarity for people like men, offers part of the antidote to toxic masculinity. So Natalie, thanks again, and thanks again for all of you who are watching. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.